Let's Talk with Anna Glavinsky.
Now, I'm joined on the line by journalist Nathan Dunne, and he's got a book out which is called When Nothing Seems Real. And the opening sort of intro that I saw to this book says he jumped into a lake for a swim one evening, and when he emerged, his identity was simply gone. Now, at first, I thought this was going to be a story about fraud and identity theft. I thought perhaps some cheeky pranksters took his clothes and his wallet whilst he was swimming in a lake and left him to walk home naked, or perhaps even darker than that, some identity fraudsters took all of his identity, all of his documents, and stole who he was. But the reality of what happened, I think, sounds far scarier than any of these sorts of tangible situations where it would literally be a case of bureaucracy and hard work. What happened is he went into a state of depersonalisation, which sounds, from what I've seen, utterly disorientating and terrifying, but it's not really for me to explain how it works. This is definitely a story for the man himself. Nathan, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. And could you just literally pick up from where I've left off and describe what is depersonalisation and what did happen to you when you came out of the lake?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Great to be with you. Basically, the initial onset for me was that it was in 2008, middle of winter, in London. I was in the throes of a brand new relationship with this enchanting woman called Maria, and we decided in a flush of spontaneity to go for this midnight swim. And it was something happened to me during that swim which really changed the course, as you've set up, really, really forever. And it was like I was struck by something, and I had a traumatic out-of-body experience whereby afterwards I was unable to return to myself as I knew it. So I completely lost my sense of self, my identity. I didn't recognize, my partner, at least not at first. And I had obviously no prior experience of this. And so it was all like this complete shock. It was like a complete switch being flipped. And it was only years later that I came to get a formal diagnosis of depersonalization. And it's characterized by feeling like the world isn't real, feeling like everything around you is in question. So the objects that you recognize in a kind of basic domestic environment or whatever, like even in your kitchen, like you question whether they exist or not. And so basically what happened to me was that after this initial onset, my life completely collapsed because doctors didn't know what was wrong with me. And so then I began just an endless search for what was wrong with me. So it was it upended everything. But years later, I came to understand it as a condition, as depersonalization. And
so when you're describing that sort of sense of everything not feeling real and you not recognizing yourself, would that be similar to what you see in films or what maybe some people listening have experienced as, when you literally can't remember your name? Did you remember your name, the date? Or is it more abstract, like you don't know, you know who you are, but you don't feel right in your own body? Or I don't really explain. Can you describe it?
It is strange. It's very abstract.
Yeah.
Basically, it is as though your agency, the way that you feel like that you act, has been removed. So you feel like an automaton, a robot, as if you yourself are not acting. Let me put it like this. Say there, like with many illnesses, there is a scale. Okay. So there is what I experienced, which is at the most extreme acute end, but then there is also what we call transient depersonalization. And so say if you are a 15-year-old on a suburban baseball team and you have a great game, afterwards you win, you lift up the trophy, it's a really exhilarating moment. Your mother on the way home looks across at you in the car seat and she says, "How was that for you?" And then you reply, "It felt like it was happening to somebody else." And so that's like a completely ordinary, non-clinical, non-medical situation. Another example, which is just very every day is that maybe on a commute on the way home from work and you pull into your driveway or car spot and you kind of have been on automatic and you don't know, like, hang on, how did I get here? You were kind of just going, you forgot who you were for a moment and you just kind of were on automatic. So these are, again, that's a very temporary, transient experience of it, and on the very the most the lightest and mildest end of what I experienced. But on the extreme end, it's like as though this switch is flipped. And there is a number of different reasons for that in terms of the way that it happens in the brain, like different areas of the brain get activated and that kind of thing. But it is, to answer your question, you do know who you are, but it doesn't matter anymore because you're not living in the same place, the same world with, the same kind of tactile relationships that you have with loved ones or your kind of domestic or work environments. Like everything changes and is called into question, which it won't surprise people is quite terrifying.
Yeah, it sounds utterly terrifying. It sounds super weird and like something that you just wouldn't even know how to begin looking for help for, because like you say, it's so abstract. I think that is the word that I'm really hearing here. How did you begin to start going to get help, and how did you you knew it was serious? How did you know that you had to get help? You didn't think, I'll just go to sleep and this will pass in the morning?
Well, initially that's what I had hoped, but then the morning afterwards, it really just felt as though, my life was coming to an end. And so, I mean, it was the lowest point in my life. And it was extremely difficult to come back from. And so my first point of contact was in the English, the UK NHS system. And I later learned that misdiagnosis is extremely common because, two forms of mental illness that we're very good at talking about in the culture now are depression and anxiety. And so when I fronted up and I was using these abstract words and trying to describe what had happened to me, then initially the doctor thought, okay, well, this is a symptom of one of those other conditions. It's a symptom of anxiety, something that has to be attached to that. There was no other explanation. So I was, given a cocktail of medication. I was told, put through the normal kind of steps that a GP might do if someone presents with presents in the way that I did. The horrible irony, Anna, is that actually, it was like 3 or 4 tube stops away in South London at the Maudsley Hospital. There is a depersonalisation clinic that was started by an incredible doctor called Anthony David in the 90s. And it has very few staff, etc. But my frustration was that, like, with the way that the NHS was structured at the time, I was not able to be pointed towards that specialist. And so it ended up being 3 to 4 years later, and when I came back to Australia, to actually find the right doctor. But it's only in writing this book and talking to other patients and neuroscientists and other English doctors and things that they actually told me about this clinic, and I've now connected with them. But I guess the personal tragedy of mine at the time was that when I most needed help, it felt like no one knew what was happening. No one could help me, no matter what I could do, no matter what everyone around me could do. And yet half an hour away in South London, there were these people who really understood. So it was really a problem of awareness and all these other factors. But that's kind of a little bit of inside baseball in terms of how I was kind of pushed around in terms of the NHS and then finally to find the right doctor.
And so is that the aim of this book, to raise awareness maybe for other people that are experiencing something similar and be able to point them, stop them from, fumbling around in the dark, almost like you had to do?
Definitely. And in all of the research and interviews that I did for the book, there are so many other people. I mean, it's the stats are like 1.5 to 2% of the population. So in the UK, that would be 1.2 million. In Australia, that would be like extrapolate to about 500,000 people. And so the more and more that I talk about it and other people in the depersonalization community, people who I've connected with talk about it does raise so much more awareness and does help people. I mean, since publishing the book in the last month, so many people have reached out to me from all around the world too, sending me their own personal stories, and so remarkably similar. You go to the doctor, you get misdiagnosed or you get pushed around. And even for members of your audience who this doesn't map completely onto depersonalization, I think that there are so many illnesses that are not as widely known, which people also have an experience of misdiagnosis. So if you don't fit into one of those normal let's just call them broad categories, then you often can slip between the cracks. And so we've come a long way. I mean, this happened to me in 2008, so we've come a long way since then in terms of awareness. And in the last 10 years particularly, there's been a lot more mainstream attention. But yeah, I'm really hoping that my book does allow people who have experienced it to feel like this story is shared with mine in some way, and also just to let people know that mental illness and mental health is much more than just depression and anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wide spectrum. It can cover so many symptoms. And I do think awareness is being raised, because listening to you speak now, you've actually just triggered a thought of mine. So my kiddo is adopted and he comes from a background of trauma, and he had to fill in sort of a self-awareness questionnaire recently, you know, how he feels about certain things. And one of the questions was, does he feel like everything is real or something along those lines? And he scored quite highly on feeling like things aren't, that he doesn't really understand why he's living in this world. Now, we have that questionnaire hasn't gone any further yet. You know, nothing's been picked up on it, but it's one sort of standalone answer. I was like, wow, that's he's feeling something. I don't have a clue how to deal with that one. But the fact that the question is on the questionnaire makes me think that what you're talking about is being recognized, and what you're doing is really helping to shine a light on something that could become a lot more mainstream.
Oh, look, I really hope so. And I think it would help a lot of people, because this really does have, I promise you, this really has a massive impact on individuals and their families. And I mean, mine is a really positive story, because I was able to find the right help and come out the other side. But over the course of, of writing the book and just, and even hearing from people in the last month, I mean, it affects families in the worst possible ways. I mean, mine is a success story, but I think that if we can talk about it more, and I mean, there's so many issues embedded within the medical system itself, which, we could do better at talking about in terms of like clinical training and like access to services and so many other different things. But I think just the most important thing, I think, when you're most ill, is that you want to be lifted out of like this wordless place that you have into knowledge of some kind. I often like to say the diagnosis is hope. And it's like, if you can get a correct diagnosis anyway, and because then you feel at least that there is some path towards treatment. Like you've got people on your team who can, who are at least looking for the answers. And I think, that's so important. And I really hope that it can help people in continuing to talk about it in the way that we are today.
I think it definitely is. And I've got to say as well, I think it's incredibly brave of you to share this story. It's something so personal, and probably by the sounds of it, you're going to have to start bracing yourself for being a bit of a pin-up for people who want to come and speak to you and talk about it, because you are putting yourself in that position, because you are, by the sounds of it as well, a beacon of hope for people who haven't been able to put names onto what they're feeling. So let's talk a little bit about that success story now. How are you feeling? What have you learned? What is the journey like to get to a place where you feel that you can call it a success story?
Yeah, look, it has been definitely a long one over the last couple of decades. I've been through a whole range of treatments. one of the key things has been the strain on personal relationships and particularly romantic ones. I mean, one of the things that the book touches on is the collapse of my relationship that I was in at the time. And then, I mean, when you don't know yourself and you are trying to find out this incredibly difficult thing that's wrong with you, and you don't have any answers, it's not an ideal time for dating. And so it's, things become very difficult to navigate in terms of that. And so when I think about where I am at the moment, I have been able to, my wife and I just a few weeks ago had our first baby.
Oh,
and so
congratulations.
that is one of the things that I was at the core of me, I feel like that would never happen when I was most ill, because I couldn't really talk to people. I couldn't go outside. And so just to be in a stable relationship and now being able to be a father, a parent, and feel that responsibility, something that I never thought would happen to me. I never thought, frankly, and not to be too more, but I never felt like I would be here with you. And I never thought that I would be able to keep living. And so that is, I'd say, my greatest success, just to be here to talk to you right now, and to have just become a father feels like just the most heavenly, rewarding thing. And so, but to return a little bit to how I got here in terms of like the treatment, initially after my misdiagnosis and the cocktail of medication I was on, I did various forms of like CBT treatment and writing down, following various therapist guidelines in terms of diaries and days and charts and things like that. And they were all helpful to a degree, but it was like the most perverse game of snakes and ladders. It was like it was like on a Tuesday I'd be up a little, on Thursday I'd be down. And it was so inconsistent and so uncertain. And so it made me feel almost always unstable. And I think that's what defines a kind of chronic illness in a way. The one treatment that people might not be as familiar with that really helped me is something called RTMS. And basically what that is a doctor and a technician will be able to identify, using low pulse magnets, areas of the brain which are seen as underfunctioning or underperforming, and they kind of go in with these pulses and kind of refuel them in a way, reanimate them to get the different pathways flowing again in a way. And I found that over the course of about 6 months of that treatment, it kind of about 80% of the extreme symptoms that I had were diluted. And so that was extremely helpful for me. And at the time, it was, again, like a fairly new burgeoning treatment, but it's now much wider spread. So it was a combination of treatments like that and medication and therapy, like talking therapy, that really have helped me come to where I am today.
Fantastic. Look, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm so happy that you found that what worked for you, but also grateful that you're willing to share that with so many other people. Congratulations on your book, and of course on becoming a dad as well. That is really lovely.
Yes, thank you.
We've been speaking to Nathan Dunne. His book is called When Nothing Seems Real. You can find it on Amazon or on the Talk Radio Europe bookshop. Nathan, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Bye-bye.